I think we need to have another talk. I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night, but I did spend 5.5 years at university studying the art of language. And while everyone else was doing physics calculations and lab experiments and studying to play the flute, I studied words. I learned about things like definitions and diction and declaratives and syntax and synonyms and modifiers and anagrams and parables and novellas and adverbs and arguments and onomatopoeia and alliteration and the art of asking the right questions. Language was my medium, my canvas, and to some extent it still is. I take it seriously, and just like Rembrandt can paint a beautiful landscape with oils, writers and journalists can paint a beautiful paragraph with words, as long as the words hit the right notes. I love words because words matter. It's what binds us all together, and despite all of our differences and backgrounds and personal twists and turns, language is the common thread in all of us. When everything else falls apart and nothing seems in common, we fall back on the written and the spoken word. In other words, we communicate. Words matter because not all words are created equal. Just like all catfish are fish, not all fish are catfish. Sometimes words end up meaning different things to different people, crossing cultures and dialects with redefinition and purpose. And sometimes words get added or dropped based on presiding times. And sometimes words just end up taking different meanings upon themselves, oftentimes inaccurate and irrelevant. Language is an art form that's constantly evolving and changing shape, but most of all it's a place where the lazy, the prudish, and sometimes the clever end up burying facts inside of fiction. Let me give you the easiest and most notorious example I can think of. The mainstream media reported on the failed attempt of the Bush administration to find clear and actionable nuclear bomb-making material or centrifuges, let alone complete nuclear bombs, after the invasion of Iraq. Now, clearly, Iraq's nuclear program was nowhere as progressed as Colin Powell and his henchmen suggested. This point has been universally agreed upon by both major parties, and getting both parties to agree on anything is a Herculean feat unto itself. The events took a linguistic turn for the gutter, however, when the phrase weapons of mass destruction became part of the American lexicon. After months of intelligence gathering, hearings, reports, and news conferences, the abbreviation WMD suddenly became synonymous with nuclear weapons. But the words are not interchangeable. In fact, they are far from similar. A weapon of mass destruction is a broad, generic term used to define any number of weapons that can be used to kill large numbers of people with relatively straightforward triggers. Large improvised explosive devices have been classified as WMDs, such as the Oklahoma City bombing. And so too have chemical and biological weapons. Weapons Iraq both stockpiled in quantities unseen by any other country on the planet, and weapons Iraq had actually used to kill thousands of their own people. The media played loose with the syntax, however, and soon convinced the public that the term WMD was a substitute for the term nuclear weapon. We know that not to be true, of course. Iraq had hordes of WMDs. In fact, many scholars and military strategists would argue that Iraq had the worst kind of all, biochem weapons. Weapons so deadly and obscene that they are prohibited by the Geneva Convention. You can't say that about a lot of conventional nukes. So when someone says Bush lied, Iraq had no WMDs, they have a misunderstanding of language. And when you misunderstand language, you start misunderstanding facts. Iraq had no advanced nuclear centrifuges and nuclear weapons, but that's entirely different from not having any weapons of mass destruction, which Iraq was so open and proud about, they bragged about using them against the Kurdish refugees in the late 80s. Now, none of this in any way exonerates or excuses the congressional and executive falsehood that Iraq had nuclear weapons. It was a terrible miscalculation that even those who made the determination now abruptly apologize for. We fucked up. But that's an entirely different argument altogether. Missing the target on military intelligence on Iraq's nuclear weapons program has nothing to do with whether Iraq had WMDs. They did. We know because there's actual video of the massacre. So why does all this matter? You're saying, Chris, you're getting worked up in nothing more than semantics. But semantics are differences without a distinction. But that's not the case here. And all too often, it's not the case elsewhere. You know, the courtroom is a great proving ground where language matters. And they have a term I'd like to share, voir dire. It translates loosely to search for the truth, and would-be jurors take part in the voir dire as attorneys on both sides of the court ask jurors questions that might uncover a predisposed bias or compromise and their ability to impart fairness on the court. Attorneys are given great latitude to ask nearly anything they want, even deep personal questions, to determine whether someone can be an impartial seeker of the truth or not. Words are like a pool of jurors waiting to be voir dired. Without the scrutiny of a juror, The courtroom cannot ensure a fair trial, and without the scrutiny of language, a word's definitions cannot stand on its own either. We got to do a better job of choosing our words carefully because they're the etchings on the cave wall that are going to outlive all of us. Facts are stubborn things, but not quite as stubborn as we are. Not every WMD is a nuclear weapon, and not every journalist with a byline understands the difference between a fish and a catfish.